If you think about the fall of empires due to bad financial policies, the reasons never change. Fiscal discipline dies, money supply explodes, debt curves go vertical, and then the society starts to crack. You see, every superpower discovers the same trick. When you run out of money, just create more. It works until it destroys everything. And right now, the United States is running the same experiment every dead empire ran before it. The Roman denarius once contained 95% pure silver. By 270 AD, it was less than 5%. The empire didn't fall to barbarians first. It fell to its own printing press. Between 1914 and 1923, Germany increased its money supply by 1.4 trillion%. 9 years later, Adolf Hitler walked into power. The Weimar Republic didn't collapse from war reparations alone. It drowned in its own currency. In 1971, Richard Nixon closed the gold window. 54 years later, the United States national debt stands at $36 trillion. The world's reserve currency is now backed by nothing but confidence, military power, and the inertia of history. Every dominant power in recorded history has faced the same temptation at the height of its strength. Every single one has taken the same path, and every empire that has ever printed its way out of crisis has discovered the same truth too late. You cannot create prosperity by creating money. You can only destroy the prosperity you already have. The question isn't whether this happens. The question is why it happens with such mathematical precision, why no empire ever learns from the one before it, and why we're watching it unfold again right now. The year is 211 AD. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, known to history as Caracalla, sits in Rome. The empire stretches from Britain to Mesopotamia. 60 million people live under Roman law. The Pax Romana has held for 2 centuries, but the treasury is empty. The frontiers are vast. The legions are expensive. Rome's military payroll alone consumes 75% of imperial revenue. Soldiers demand higher wages. Germanic tribes probe the Rhine. The Parthians threaten the east. Every frontier needs more men. More men need more silver. The solution seems elegant. If we need more coins, we make more coins. The imperial mints receive their orders. Add more copper to the silver. Reduce the silver content gradually. No one will notice if we do it slowly. Caracalla issues the Antoninianus, a new silver coin. It's marked as worth 2 denarii, but contains only 1.5 denarii worth of silver. The debasement begins not with collapse, but with clever accounting. The difference goes to the treasury. The legions get paid. The crisis is delayed. By 260 AD, under Gallienus, the silver content has fallen to 20%. By 270 AD, under Aurelian, it reaches 5%. The coin still bears the emperor's face. It still carries the mark of Rome, but it's not silver anymore. It's bronze with a silver wash. The consequences arrive in waves. First, prices rise. A measure of wheat that cost half a denarius in 200 AD costs 50 denarii by 270 AD. Then hoarding begins. Anyone with old coins made of real silver melts them down or hides them. Gresham's law operates with mechanical efficiency. Bad money drives out good. The new debased coins flood the market. The old valuable coins vanish from circulation. Tax collection collapses. Why accept payment in coins that lose value every month? The government demands payment in goods instead. The monetary economy contracts trade, becomes barter. Merchants refuse transactions. Cities shrink. The complex supply chains that fed Rome's million inhabitants break down. The military begins to understand what has happened. Legions refuse the debased currency. They demand payment in gold or land instead. Some legions march on Rome to install their own emperor, one who might pay them properly. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome cycles through 50 emperors in 49 years. 26 die by assassination. Most are killed by their own troops, the same troops they couldn't afford to pay. The empire doesn't fall to Goths or Vandals in this moment. It tears itself apart. fighting over increasingly worthless money. By the time Diocletian stabilizes the currency in 301 AD with his edict on maximum prices, attempting to freeze all wages and prices by decree, the damage is permanent. The edict fails within years. You cannot legislate value into existence any more than you can mint it. When Alaric sacks Rome in 410 AD, he's looting a city that has already been hollowed out by a century of monetary collapse. The barbarians don't destroy Roman civilization. They inherit its ruins. Fast forward 11 centuries. Spain controls an empire where the sun never sets. Gold and silver pour from the mines of Potosi and Zacatecas. Between 1500 and 1650, Spanish America produces 150,000 tons of silver. It's the greatest mineral wealth transfer in human history to that point. King Philip II of Spain takes the throne in 1556. His inheritance includes the Netherlands, Naples, Sicily, Milan, the Spanish Americas, and the Philippines. The empire generates enormous revenue, but Philip inherits something else: debt. His father, Charles V, has borrowed heavily to finance decades of European wars. Philip needs more revenue than the empire produces. The solution is obvious. He debases the coinage. The Spanish maravedí and the silver real both suffer repeated devaluations. He also borrows more, defaulting on his debts in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. Each default is followed by renegotiation and new loans at higher interest rates. The Spanish crown discovers what Rome discovered. Massive inflows of precious metals don't create wealth if you debase the currency and spend beyond your means. The price revolution sweeps through Spain. Between 1500 and 1600, prices in Spain increase by 400%. The same amount of silver buys less bread, less cloth, less labor. Spanish manufacturing collapses. Why make goods in Spain when imports are cheaper? Dutch and English merchants flood Spanish markets with finished products. Spanish silver flows out immediately to pay for foreign goods. The empire becomes a conduit. Silver arrives from America, passes through Spain, and ends up in Amsterdam, London, and Genoa. By 1643, Spanish finance is a shadow game. The crown issues juros, government bonds that promise payment from future revenues. The debt compounds. Philip IV inherits both empire and insolvency. He debases the copper vellon coinage repeatedly in the 1620s and 1630s, triggering riots in Madrid in 1624 and major revolts in Catalonia and Portugal in 1640. The empire doesn't lose its territory to better armies first. It loses its economic foundation. When Portugal breaks away in 1640, when the Netherlands wins independence in 1648, they're not defeating Spain militarily, they're abandoning a sinking currency union. By 1700, Spain is a secondary power. The gold and silver still arrive from America, but they arrive into an economy that has forgotten how to produce anything but debt. The pattern repeats with mechanical precision. France in the 1790s. The revolutionary government inherits a fiscal crisis and a war with all of Europe. The assignat paper currency, backed by confiscated church lands, launches in 1789. The first notes hold value. Then the government prints more. By 1795, the assignat has lost 99% of its value. Inflation reaches levels that make prices double every few weeks. The revolution devours itself partly from ideology, partly from hunger, and partly from monetary chaos that makes food supply impossible. China in the 1940s. The nationalist government fights Japan and then the communists. The printing presses run constantly. By 1949, inflation reaches 5,000% per month. People stop using money entirely. Mao Zedong doesn't defeat Chiang Kai-shek just through peasant support. He defeats an economy that has already destroyed itself. When the nationalists flee to Taiwan, they leave behind a currency so worthless that people use it as wallpaper. But the clearest, most studied, most devastating example remains Germany between 1914 and 1923. In 1914, the German mark is stable. 1 mark equals 23.8 cents in gold-backed American dollars. The German Empire is an industrial powerhouse. It leads the world in chemicals, optics, and electrical engineering. Berlin rivals London and Paris. Then comes August 1914. War. Germany needs to finance the largest military mobilization in history. The traditional approach would be raising taxes, but that's unpopular. Citizens might question the war if they have to pay for it directly. Borrowing is an option, but there are limits to how much the bond market will absorb. The solution? Print. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, abandons the gold standard. The printing presses begin their work. Money supply expands to fund the war effort. Between 1914 and 1918, German money supply increases by 400%. Prices double, then triple, but Germany is under wartime price controls. The inflation is suppressed, hidden, waiting. November 1918. Germany surrenders. The Kaiser abdicates. The Weimar Republic emerges in chaos. The Treaty of Versailles imposes reparations. 132 billion gold marks. It's a staggering sum, roughly $400 billion in today's dollars, to be paid over decades. Germany is to pay in gold or foreign currency. This is critical. The Allies don't want payment in marks that Germany can print. They want payment in money that holds value internationally. The Weimar government faces an impossible situation. The economy is devastated. Industrial production has fallen by 50%. Millions of men have returned from the front, needing jobs that don't exist. The government must provide social services, rebuild infrastructure, pay pensions to war widows, and somehow find gold marks to pay the Allies. The decision is made. The Reichsbank continues printing. Money supply expands month after month. By 1922, $1 equals 320 marks. Prices are rising, but still manageable. Then comes January 1923. France and Belgium, frustrated by delayed reparations, occupy the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. The German government responds with passive resistance. Workers in the Ruhr go on strike. Industrial production stops, but the government still pays the striking workers. How? By printing money. Between January and November 1923, the situation goes from crisis to apocalypse. The numbers become surreal. In January 1923, $1 equals 17,000 marks. By August, $1 equals 4.6 million marks. By November, $1 equals 4.2 trillion marks. The printing presses run 24 hours a day. The Reichsbank can't print money fast enough. Private printers are hired. At the peak, 133 printing firms employ 1,783 presses running around the clock to print currency. Workers are paid twice a day because prices rise so fast during a single shift that morning wages won't buy lunch. People carry money in wheelbarrows, laundry baskets, and baby carriages. The iconic image of a child playing with blocks made of bundled marks isn't propaganda, it's documentation. Money has become cheaper than wood, but the real destruction isn't the spectacle of worthless paper. It's what happens to social cohesion. A lifetime of savings evaporates in weeks. A prudent middle-class family with money in the bank wakes up one day to find their entire savings won't buy a loaf of bread. Pensions become worthless. Anyone on a fixed income faces starvation. Those with hard assets, with land or factories or foreign currency, survive or even profit. Those who live by the rules, saved money, trusted in the system, are destroyed. An entire generation learns that virtue is punished and prudence is folly. The social contract breaks. Faith in institutions collapses. The center cannot hold. In November 1923, Adolf Hitler attempts his beer hall putsch in Munich. He fails and goes to prison. But he's seen the truth. A population that has lost everything is ready to follow anyone who promises to restore what was taken. 10 years later, in January 1933, Hitler becomes chancellor. He doesn't rise because Germans are uniquely evil. He rises because Germany experienced something that breaks societies, the total destruction of monetary value, and with it, trust in the social order. The pattern is documented. We know how this story plays out. Yet here we are, watching it unfold again on a global scale. August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon appears on television at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. He announces that the United States will no longer convert dollars to gold at $35 per ounce. The gold window closes. The Bretton Woods system, which has governed international monetary relations since 1944, ends. For the first time in history, the world's reserve currency is backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the issuing government. No gold, no silver, no commodity backing of any kind. Just trust. The reasons are clear. The United States has spent heavily on the Vietnam War and on domestic programs. The guns and barter approach is expensive. Other countries, particularly France under Charles de Gaulle, have started exchanging their dollars for gold. The U.S. gold reserves are draining. Nixon faces a choice: either dramatically cut spending and possibly trigger a recession, or end the gold standard. He chooses the latter. What follows is the largest monetary expansion in human history. When money is backed by gold, there are limits. Gold is finite. You can't print gold. But when money is backed only by confidence, the limits are whatever a government decides they are. In 1971, the U.S. national debt is $398 billion. Today, it's $360 trillion. That's a 9,000% increase. In the same period, the dollar has lost 87% of its purchasing power. What cost $1 in 1971 costs $7.68 today. The Federal Reserve's response to every crisis since 1971 follows the same pattern. In 2000, the dot-com bubble bursts. The Fed lowers interest rates to 1% and expands the money supply. In 2008, the financial crisis hits. The Fed cuts rates to zero and launches quantitative easing, creating $3.5 trillion in new money. In 2020, COVID-19 arrives. The Fed creates $4 trillion in 18 months, a faster rate of money creation than any period in American peacetime history. The M2 money supply, which includes cash, checking deposits, and easily convertible assets, stood at $15.5 trillion in January 2020. By April 2022, it reached $21.7 trillion. That's 40% growth in 27 months. The justifications change, but the policy remains constant. We must prevent deflation. We must support employment. We must ensure market stability. Each crisis is treated as unique, requiring unprecedented intervention. But the intervention is always the same. Create more money. The effects ripple outward. Asset prices inflate. Stock markets reach record highs, even as median wages stagnate. Housing becomes unaffordable for young families in major cities. A generation graduates into an economy where the price of entry keeps rising faster than incomes. Wealth inequality reaches levels not seen since the 1920s. But this time, there's a difference. Previous empires debased their own currency. The Romans inflated the denarius, but only Romans had to use denarii. The United States is inflating the world's reserve currency. 70 countries peg their currency to the dollar. International trade is conducted in dollars. Central banks hold dollars as reserves. When the Fed prints, the entire world feels it. Other nations are beginning to notice. China and Russia conduct bilateral trade in yuan and rubles, bypassing the dollar. Saudi Arabia, which has priced oil exclusively in dollars since 1974, now discusses accepting UN the BRICS nations, representing 40% of global population, explore alternatives to dollar dominance. The pattern suggests what comes next. Rome didn't wake up one day to find its empire gone. The collapse was gradual, then sudden. First, the frontiers became harder to hold. Then provinces started breaking away. Then the pretenders multiplied. Finally, someone else took over and called it something new. The United States still holds enormous advantages. The dollar's reserve status creates demand regardless of fundamentals. The U.S. military ensures that major energy and trade routes remain denominated in dollars. American financial markets are deep and liquid. Inertia is a powerful force, but inertia is not destiny. History shows that reserve currencies change. The Portuguese real dominated trade in the 1500s. Then the Spanish real, then the Dutch guilder, then the British pound. Each transition seemed unthinkable until it happened. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency in 1914. By 1945, it was the dollar. The transition took 30 years and 2 world wars, but it happened. The current trajectory is unsustainable in mathematical terms. The Congressional Budget Office projects that by 2053, interest payments on the debt alone will consume 100% of federal revenue. Every dollar collected in taxes will go to interest, not to defense, not to Social Security, not to infrastructure, just interest. That's the projection, assuming no additional crises, no wars, no pandemics, no recessions that require stimulus. It assumes perfect conditions. History suggests perfect conditions don't last for 30 years. The political incentives push toward continued expansion. No politician wants to be responsible for the painful adjustments required to restore fiscal balance. Cutting spending means angry constituents. Raising taxes means angry constituents. Printing money means the consequences arrive later, ideally on someone else's watch. This is why the pattern repeats. It's not that leaders don't know history. It's that the immediate political pressures override long-term thinking every single time the emperor who debases the currency survives another year. The emperor who refuses gets overthrown by his own soldiers demanding payment. We see the mechanism now, watching it unfold in real time. Each stimulus package is justified by immediate crisis. Each expansion of the money supply is temporary. Just this once, unprecedented circumstances. But the temporary becomes permanent. The unprecedented becomes precedent. The Europeans tried to avoid this pattern with the Eurozone. Remove monetary policy from individual nations, they reasoned, and you remove the temptation to print, but then came the sovereign debt crisis of 2010 to 2012. Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland all faced default. The European Central Bank, despite its mandate, began its own quantitative easing program. The ECB's balance sheet expanded from 2 trillion euros in 2008 to 8.8 trillion euros by 2021. Japan provides the longest running experiment. Since 1989, Japan has run persistent deficits and expanded its monetary base. The Bank of Japan now owns over 40% of Japanese government bonds and has begun purchasing stocks directly. Japan's debt to GDP ratio exceeds 250%, the highest in the developed world. Yet Japan hasn't collapsed. Why? Japan is different in 2 crucial ways. First, Japanese debt is almost entirely owned domestically. The Japanese people, with high savings rates, buy their own government's bonds. Second, the yen is not the global reserve currency. Japan's monetary experiments affect Japan primarily, not the entire world system. The United States has neither advantage. US debt is held globally, and the dollar's collapse would be everyone's problem simultaneously. We're watching something unprecedented, an experiment in whether a global reserve currency can survive unlimited expansion. Every historical precedent says no, but every historical precedent involves regional powers, not a global hegemon with the world's reserve currency and largest military. The question isn't whether the pattern holds. The pattern has held without exception for 3,000 years. The question is what happens when the pattern plays out with the world's reserve currency, when there's no alternative system waiting to absorb the transition, when the entire global financial architecture is denominated in the collapsing currency. Rome fell and the world became smaller, poorer, and more fragmented for centuries. But the world went on. What happens when the currency underpinning global trade, energy markets, and international reserves follows Rome's denarius into irrelevance? We don't know. This has never happened before at this scale. We're in uncharted territory, sailing toward a storm that every historical map says is inevitable, armed with nothing but the conviction that this time is different, that we are smarter than Rome, wiser than Spain, more careful than Weimar Germany. History whispers that empires always believe they're different, right up until the moment they discover they're not. The printing press is running. The debt is climbing. The pattern is repeating with mathematical precision. The only questions that remain: how long does the faith hold? What breaks it when it breaks? And what comes after the world stops believing in paper promises backed by nothing but the memory of power that used to be?